All right, welcome back, everybody. We are working on round 2 of solving equations by multiplying and dividing, except for this time we're using rational numbers. So the numbers aren't going to be as pretty. That's okay. Our calculator is going to be doing most of the calculations for us. You just have to make sure you're typing in the right things and that you're going in the right order. So we're going to jump right into this. Our example 1 is x divided by 2.5, or x over 2 1/2. Remember, that fraction bar means divide. So x divided by 2.5 equals -32. That's example 1. Example 2, we have 8/3 x, or 8/3 times x equals 2. This one confuses a lot of people. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to solve it. We talked to the middle school this year, and they had a few things they wanted you to try now so that you have it picked up and you're ready for it next year. So things will be a little bit different when we get to multiplying a fraction in a variable, how to undo that, but we'll talk about it when we get to that step. So getting into the steps, if you haven't figured it out already, step 1 is to draw your railroad tracks. You've only heard that about 1,000,000 times at this point. So you draw railroad tracks on each side of the equal sign, just like every other problem that we've done. So example 1, drawing my railroad tracks on each side of the equal sign. Example 2, railroad tracks on each side of the equal sign. All right. Step 2, circle the variable and anything attached to it. So I'm going to circle the variable and anything attached to it. And don't forget the sign in front, people, not the sign after the variable, the sign in front. Okay, so example 1, I'm circling anything attached to the x. And right now, x is divided by 2.5. Those two are attached to each other. So I'm going to circle it. It's not going to affect the problems today very much, but again, we're just getting in the habit of doing this so that when we move on to two-step equations, you're in the habit already. And on this one, we have 8/3 x. That 8/3 is attached to the x, so I'm going to circle it. No negatives out in front, so we don't need to worry about that. Step 3, get the variable. Get the variable by itself by using inverse or opposite operations. All right. Again, you've seen this 5, 6, 7 times now, this exact sentence. You have it in your notes in multiple places. We're doing the same thing. We're just solving. We're getting everything away from x, from the variable. Just remember that whatever you do on one side, you must do to the other. All right. And most of you are pretty good at doing that. Very rarely do I see someone times by 2.5 on the left and forget to do it on the right. But I'm going to put it in the steps because it's important that you remember to do that. Okay, so I've got step 4 right here. This is a special situation. This step is only if we're multiplying a variable by a fraction. Okay, so step 4 over here on the left, if you want to write that it's only if the variable is being multiplied by a fraction. This is only if the variable is being multiplied by a fraction in the original equation. All right? So we're going to ignore step 4 for number 1, example 1, because right now x is being divided by a fraction. It's not being multiplied by a fraction. So we're going to treat this like we would any other problem. To undo dividing by 2.5, I have to multiply by 2 1/2. And that's going to make this and these cancel each other out, and all I'm left with is x. And so on the right-hand side, I multiplied by 2.5. Or on the left, I already did it, so I have to do it on the right as well. -32 multiplied by 2.5. We'll put that in our calculator. We'll let it do the work for us. -32 multiplied by 2 1/2. Now be really careful that your picture here looks like what you want to be done up here. I've got -32 times and the 2 1/2, all the pieces are in the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and I get an answer of -80. So I think that x is 80. And just like before, I'm going to check my work. That's step 5 down here. We'll skip 4 for just a minute. We're going to check our solution to this one. We think x is negative 80, so I'm going to plug it in. Negative 80 divided by 2.5. And we think that that's going to equal negative 32. But we want to make sure. We want to double check. So let's do it. Negative 80 divided by 2.5 is equal to negative 32. So I got negative 32 on the left and negative 32 on the right. So I know that my answer is correct. Before I even turn in my test or my quiz, I already know that I did it correctly. Okay? Now for this special step, step 4, really it's just a shortcut to solving this one. Because right now the way you've been taught, 8/3 times x, to undo that, you've been taught that we should divide both sides by 8/3. So one way to do this is to divide by 8/3, and I divide this side by 8/3. What the middle school doesn't like is that when we divide by a fraction, we have to do one extra step. And if you remember, to divide by a fraction, we actually multiply by the reciprocal. So instead of dividing by 8/3, I would take 2 and I would times it by 3/8. And that does the same thing as dividing by 8/3. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to skip this step. We're not even going to divide by 8/3. If I ever see a fraction in front of a variable like this, my inverse operation is a little bit different. So if the variable is being multiplied by a fraction, instead of dividing both sides by the fraction, instead of dividing them both by the fraction, my shortcut is to multiply both sides. I'm going to multiply both sides by the fraction's reciprocal. The fraction's reciprocal. Now remember, reciprocal, that just means that you flip the fraction over. If you don't remember, that means you flip the fraction over. So 1/2, the reciprocal, becomes 2/1. Or negative 3/4, the reciprocal is negative 4/3. We don't change the sign, we just flip the fraction over. The numerator becomes the denominator, and the denominator becomes the numerator. So in this example, I'm multiplying by a fraction. Instead of dividing by the fraction, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. 8/3, the reciprocal, the 3 goes on the top, and I move the 8 to the bottom. And if I do that to the left, I also have to do that to the right. Multiply by 3/8. Okay? And the reason that cancels out is 8/3 times 3/8. If we look at the math, 8/3 times 3/8. 8 times 3 is 24. 3 times 8 is 24. So that actually just becomes 1. And all that we're left with on this side is our x. Okay? So that's what your calculator's doing. When you plug that in, that's what your calculator's doing. So on the right-hand side, I've got 2 times 3/8. And we'll go ahead and we'll plug that in the calculator. 2 times 3/8. And that tells me 3/4. I think that x is 3/4. Okay, so I'm going to plug that in. 8/3 times x. Instead of x, I'm going to multiply by 3/4. And I'm hoping that my answer is 2. If I did the math right, 8/3 times 3/4 should equal to 2. And it does. So I get 2 on the left, I get 2 on the right, so I can give myself a check mark. I checked my work, I know that they're the same. That's really the only difference you're going to see. You can divide by 8/3 on both sides, but that's going to require you an extra step. We want to try and skip that. So if you're multiplying a variable and a fraction in the original equation, take the shortcut. Instead of dividing by the fraction, multiply by its reciprocal, and you'll get the same answer. All right? Okay, a couple problems. We're going to go through these together. I haven't left a lot of room here because I wanted to fit as many examples for us to do together as I could. So bear with me. I'll try and write legibly and make it so that you can see what's going on. Step 1 in number 1 is my railroad tracks. All right. I've got railroad tracks down the middle. Right now I've got negative 1/4 times k. And I'm going to circle that. Even though it doesn't matter as much in these problems, the 1 step, we're just practicing for the 2 step. Now this is a special case. This is like my step 4, I'm multiplying a fraction and my variable together. So to undo that, instead of dividing by my fraction, I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by a negative, and I'm going to flip this over, negative 4/1. And on this side, I'm going to multiply by a negative 4/1. All right, so this side, my negative 4/1 and my negative 1/4 cancel. So on the left, I'm just left with k is equal to, on my right-hand side, let's try this. Let's put in the calculator. Negative 17 multiplied by negative 4/1, which happens to just be the same thing as multiplying by negative 4. When I hit enter, I get 68. I think that k is 68. But again, I want to check and make sure. So I'm going to plug it into my equation. And if you don't, I'm going to send you back to do it. So you might as well do it the first time. Negative 1/4 times k, negative 1/4 times 68. We hope that that equals negative 17. So let's plug it in. Negative 1/4 times 68. And when I hit enter, I get negative 17, which is what I wanted. So negative 17 on the left is equal to negative 17 on the right. I did my math correct. Okay? Step 2, or sorry, not step 2, problem number 2. B divided by 3.875. I'm going to draw my railroad tracks. I'm going to circle my B. Right now I'm dividing by 3.875, so to do the inverse of that is to multiply by 3.875. And I want to do that to both sides, 3.875. So those ones cancel, and I'm just left with B equaling, we'll plug this in the calculator and check our work, negative 2.5 times 3.875. And when I hit enter, I get negative 9.6875. So B is equal to negative 9.6875. I think. So let's plug it in and double check. Negative 9.6875 is what I think B is, divided by 3.875, we hope is equal to negative 2.5, or negative 2.5. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Negative 9.6875 divided by 3.875. Enter tells me that I get negative 2.5. So I get negative 2.5 on the left. That is equal to my negative 2.5 on the right. So I'm doing the work correctly so far. Okay. Number 3, example 3, railroad tracks. Step 1. Step 2, I'm going to circle my variable. This one, look at what's happening. 3.5 times m is equal to negative 7/12. I'm multiplying a fraction by a variable, so I want to do step 4. Right now, I don't like a mixed number. It's kind of hard to do math with a mixed number, so I'm going to change that into a improper fraction. I can do it in my head. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7, so that's actually 7/2. But on the calculator, we're going to do it like this. We're going to take our mixed number, which is 3 1/2, and we're going to change that to an improper fraction. And I think that this button will do it for us. It does. So if I do second and this button here, you can see that it has a fraction equaling a mixed number. That'll switch them back and forth. And I like the 7/2 better. So let's rewrite that. 7/2 m equals negative 7/12. Now it's going to be a lot easier for me to solve the problem. I'm multiplying by a fraction, so step 4 says the inverse of doing that is to multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal, 7/2, is actually 2 over 7. So 7/2 times 2 over 7 cancel, and I'm left with m. And on this side, I'm going to multiply by 2 over 7, because that's what I did on the left. So let's plug that in the calculator. Negative 7/12 multiplied, oh, let's be careful, we don't want the multiplying on the bottom, multiplied by 2/7. When I hit enter, it tells me my answer is negative 1/6. So m, I think, is negative 1 over 6. And again, I'm going to take the time and I'm going to plug that in. 3 1/2 times negative 1/6, I hope, is equal to negative 7/12. So I'm going to plug that in my calculator, double check. 3 1/2 times negative 1/6. That looks like what I want it to look like. I hit enter, I get negative 7/12. So I'm correct. Negative 7/12 is equal to negative 7/12. So I can move on. Number 4, 1.5 equals negative 3.25z. Railroad tracks, I circle my variable and everything attached to it. Right now I'm multiplying z by negative 3.25. So to undo multiplying, I'm going to divide by negative 3.25. So they'll cancel on this side, but I also have to divide this side by negative 3.25. So z will be left over here, and if I put it in my calculator, 1.5 divided by negative 3.25, I get a big, long, ugly decimal. Before I write that down, I'm going to use my best friend button right here and see if I can get a nicer looking decimal, or a fraction, excuse me, and it does. Look at that fraction. That's a lot easier to write, so I'm going to put it in fraction form. Z is equal to negative 6 over 13. I like that a lot better than this big, long, if we look at this number, it just goes on and on for a really long time. I don't want to write all that. So let's double check. Let's plug z in and see if we have the right answer. 1.5 we think is equal to negative 3.25 times z, which we think is a negative 6/13. So we're going to plug that in our calculator, see if I can fit it all on the screen here for you. Negative 3.25 times negative 6 over 13. When I hit enter, I get 1.5, which is what I wanted. 1.5 is equal to 1.5. So I know I did the work correct. Your turn. You're going to go through, you're going to do these pause and try problems. A couple of things. Be careful. Look to see if we're multiplying the variable by a fraction, so you can use that shortcut. Multiply by its inverse to solve it. When you're finished, I need to see all of these steps. I need to see you plugging your answer in, rewriting the equation, and checking to see if it's correct. If I don't see those steps, I'm going to send you back to finish it. So make sure that you're following all the way through, making sure your answers are correct. When you bring this up to me, you should already know that you've done it right. This is, at that point, it should just be a formality of me making sure. So good luck to you. I'll see you in a few minutes.